away because of COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, sir. So the workers want their jobs. There's not, in the view of Labour, a likelihood of there being a mad rush forward to say, oh, give me whatever severance payment you got for me, because I can find work somewhere tomorrow morning. Because the reality is that in this environment, as I said to you, we are faced with a set of circumstances where several businesses in Barbados have already gone under, and the unemployment levels have gone through the roof. So this is a set of circumstances, sir, where we have now to try to create a level of balance and to speak the language of saving jobs, first of all. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Severance Payments Act, therefore, rests on a protocol that says that you are conferring rights on Labour and that there can be no surrender of those rights unless it makes the conditions of Labour better. And I want to begin there because I know this country well enough to know that those who enjoy the luxury of sitting on the sidelines and only finding something to criticize and carp and complain about will be the first to make an argument or a case that there has been in some way a disadvantage or a hurt inflicted on the workers of this country. Not true. Not true. What has happened, in fact, is that the workers of this country, ably represented by the Barbados Workers' Union, have come to the table and said a few things that needed to be said and made a case that needed for a long time perhaps to be made. And I feel I have a duty, as I said to you, as a Minister of Tourism in this country, speaking not on behalf of hoteliers, speaking not on behalf of Labour, but speaking on behalf of the country, to speak truth to that which are those who sent me here. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, we can't go forward if we don't understand the challenges that we are faced with. And this opportunity that we've had is an opportunity which has been given to us to take stock, as I say, of where we have come from and what we have been doing. Now, the onset of COVID created in Barbados an opportunity for some employers to cut costs at all costs. Cut costs at all costs. You hear what I say? And, Mr. Speaker, sir, an option would have existed for almost every employer to begin the process by saying, let me see how many people have not yet had vacation this year. How many people want to take an early vacation? Because in the circumstances, I realize I can't keep everybody here, but what I can do is to let you take a little leave, and then we can take stock of where we are 3-4 weeks down the road from now. But some people said, Mr. Speaker, sir, they ain't interested in that. Their perspective, sir, was to begin to solve the problem by sending home somebody or sending home a few people. In some cases, Mr. Speaker, send home a whole department. And then, Mr. Speaker, sir, to add insult to injury, lo and behold, there are people in Barbados today who have been laid off but have not yet been able to make contact with their HR department or their HR representative because the HR person has been laid off too. And those people, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I stand before you now, still cannot get to the NIS to get their unemployment benefit or any benefit at all because there is no route created for them by their employer. So that since March, through April, through May, and now into the middle of June, their circumstances are such that they are home waiting, hoping, praying, Mr. Speaker, sir. And the question that all of us with a conscience must ask ourselves, how then are they expected to survive? That is the discussion that had to be had. But Labour says to us, we get it. We understand that the country is facing a massive financial challenge. We understand that there is a danger to the national insurance if everybody was to trigger severance at one time. We understand that Barbados has just come out and is still fighting its way out of a difficult financial period that gripped this country almost in a death knell for 9, 10 painful years. But Mr. Speaker, sir, in a death vice. But Mr. Speaker, sir, they also say, and I say quite rightly so, that there cannot be a discussion simply by saying to Labour, come and help us now that we are on bended knee. Because the discussion has to be a holistic discussion that says, what about the conditions? What about the rights? What about the circumstances facing the people that we, the Labour movement, represent? And I have said in this house before, sir, and I say again, I apologize to nobody. I, in public life, in a political party, and I sit on the Labour wing of the Labour Party. And Mr. Speaker, sir, it makes perfect sense to me that we cannot go forward without having the totality of a discussion, a holistic discussion. And Mr. Speaker, sir, what is before us is a history that now requires capital, as in the owners and operators of businesses in Barbados, not only in the tourism sector, and let me say that too, not only in the tourism sector, but across this island, to take stock of some of the things that are happening and to be prepared to sit down with the Labour movement in broad consultations about these matters and let us find a way forward in the best interest of the people of the country. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, you know, we cannot have a lead sector, as tourism is expected to be, in which workers are being induced from the very outset of their association with a company. The inducement is, do not have any arrangement with a union. If you're here, they're in a union. The question must be asked, why? But that is a small problem compared to the next one. That there are people in Barbados who are investors from overseas in this country, who have benefited from concessions to have their investment in this country. Some of the concessions are sweet, Mr. Speaker, sir. Better concessions than you can get when you open your business. Better concessions than I could get when I open a business, Mr. Speaker, sir. These people whose navel string is not buried here, but then they want to be able to have a position where they're going to deny the workers' representatives access to their premises. But these are battles that we fought in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, Mr. Speaker. And when you go a little bit deeper, you have then the rise of a practice of casual employment, casual labor, so that you have a 3-month contract. And you come to work and you work for 3 months and then you lay off. And then you come back again the next month or the month after and you give back a 3-month contract again. And Mr. Speaker, sir, that goes on and on and on. But what happens to the housewife? Sorry, what happens to the mother? First of all, who has 3 little children? Who wants to be able to do some repairs to the house that she is in? What bank can she go to, sir, and ask for a loan or negotiate a loan when all she can show is a contract of employment for 3 months? What certainty does she have, Mr. Speaker, sir, that enables her to facilitate an improvement in her life? But she's working in an industry that is bringing in $1.2 billion into this country's economy. But she's a stakeholder but stay over with a 3-month contract. How does she get vacation, Mr. Speaker, sir? What are the circumstances under which she is going to be able to improve her lot? And these questions, if they're not asked in this house, Mr. Speaker, will never be answered. Because people will content themselves with feeling that they can come here, they can benefit from a suite of concessions, and I ain't going to fight with nobody right to get the concessions because we need the investment. And there's a rationale behind trying to create the circumstances for people to access concessions. But have a heart, though, because you cannot come here and treat Barbadians badly in the land of their birth and feel that that is a right that you have. And so, therefore, while we are at this point, there was a very strong feeling that this is a station at which we must pause and take stock in the interest of the future well-being of the country as a whole and the people in Barbados first and foremost. And I say without apology, the lead sector of Barbados' economy cannot be and must never be based on a foundation of casual work. There must be something of substance that connects the people who work in the tourism sector, Mr. Speaker, and the hospitality industry to personal opportunity for personal development. Right. So if that mother has a child that takes sick, and that mother has to go to a bank to negotiate some financial assistance so that she can get the necessary treatment for that child, that mother does not have an opportunity to do anything, even though she is a faithful steward and a servant of the sector, because her contract can't move past 3 months. Well, what are you telling me, Mr. Speaker? And so, therefore, it was the Prime Minister of Barbados, no less, who, when everybody else was saying, okay, we get this, well, we can get some cooperation here, and we can get a thing, and we can go forward, said, no, pause the process and let us have a process of consultation so that we can understand clearly what the issues are and have been historically and where we are going to go forward, Mr. Speaker. It has to make sense. Because it has, therefore, to be about having a partnership now built between Labour and capital. Not one taking advantage of conditions over the other. And I am pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the discussions that we had beginning on a Thursday night last week and ending on Monday, the following Monday, every day, in some instances for the whole day, ended up with a few useful things on the table. Security of employment being one of them, and enhancement of the conditions of employment being the other. Excellent. So that when we are now here to say to this House that we are asking workers to defer a right for 9 weeks in order to give their place of employment an opportunity to have a little bit more time before severance is triggered, then we are also able to say that they are asked to defer for 9 weeks in circumstances where they will have a benefit from an expedited access to severance, and there's no disadvantage to them because they will not be waiting for 4 or 5 years to get to any tribunal, but they have accelerated access to severance payment, which will be worked through by the Minister of Labour. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, more substantively than that, I am now able to make a document of this House, the fruits of those discussions, which would have taken place between Labour and Capital, which is now reduced into writing. For the first time, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the history of this country, we have now been able to take a crisis by the scruff of the neck and give birth to opportunity for working class people in Barbados. Not about handouts, not, Mr. Speaker, sir, about come see me here, give me a little financial ease, never go along about my business and continue to treat poor black people the same way they treated them for years. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, to create a framework within which you must now be held accountable to a process going forward. Under the letterhead of the Barbados Hotel Tourism Association, Mr. Speaker, sir, a commitment given in consultation and cooperation and in keeping with the principles enunciated in the ILO Convention 122 on Employment Policy. It states that where appropriate with workers' organizations and or representatives of workers at the level of the undertaking, and having regard to national economic and social conditions, measures should be taken by undertakings to counteract unemployment, help workers find jobs, increase the number of jobs available, and minimize the consequences of unemployment. And in support of the principles outlined above, it is our understanding that the parties are committed to the following. 1, a coordinated response to communications with employees and employers in the sector and the general public to promote the highest standard of labor management principles, compliance with collective agreement and existing labor legislation. And in so doing, each party agrees to furnish the other immediately details of where such standards have not been met so that appropriate investigation and corrective measures can be taken. So that hopefully now gone forever are the circumstances and the days when a hotel or any other form of business, and don't let me limit it to hotels, because the 3 week...
The honourable member has 2 more minutes.
The 3-month contract, Mr. Speaker, sir, is to be found in the construction sector. So when you get out of the lead sector, you go into the others, and you're finding it there too, where people are telling you that you ain't getting more than 3 months, so 3 weeks, so hold on to that day, or 3 months rather, hold on to that day. So that the issue, sir, of job security has been placed on the table, and a commitment given that where these issues arise, Labour will sit down with capital and they're going to work through, investigate who it is that doing it. And let us work together as peers and colleagues to resolve and weed out the bad practices and the practitioners of bad industrial policy. The second commitment, sir, to reactivate as a matter of urgency Part 36 of the Collective Agreement Consultative Committee, which allows for a structured mechanism for consultations with regard to key issues like labor market information, how to improve labor management relations, adopt common approaches where possible to the development of tourism and hospitality in Barbados, Mr. Speaker, sir, so that the way forward is no longer just about the government or the BHTA operating without partnership, hand in glove with Labour, but that at a table in a tripartite setting, in keeping with the best practice that we've shown the world, the tripartite arrangement in Barbados, that we deal with all of these developmental matters. And last but not least, sir, we commit in conjunction with government to the organization of coordinated and comprehensive hygiene and safety measures and the proposal for a safe reopening of the tourism and hospitality sector via protocols for the reopening of the accommodation sector. Labour has already met with capital since this agreement was put in place. We have had the necessary meetings with the Ministry of Health, Mr. Speaker, sir, and the accommodation sector protocols have been finalized. But, sir, we have come to this point with much difficulty. But we must not repent ourselves of the trouble that we have taken to get here. And we mustn't squander the opportunity that this crisis has presented us. So that while there has been steps taken to legally create a deferral of the right for 9 weeks so that workers can ultimately benefit from expedited access to severance with no disadvantage, and at the same time, hoteliers and restaurateurs and other business people can have an access, sir, to a little more time and breathing space. We have also been industrious in trying to tidy up the industrial relations climate in Barbados and to pave a way forward for us to do what we have to do as a people in a more wholesome fashion.
Do you all remember winding up, please?
And in those circumstances, sir, I am pleased, I am proud to be privileged to be part of a government, all the P's, sir, a government which has gone out of its way to stand by the workers of this country, a government which has tried to find a creative way of facilitating employers who are on bended knee, but holding them at the same time to principles of accountability as we go forward, and to high standards, sir, to high standards in the protection of the people who navel strain bury right here, your constituents and mine. God bless you, sir. Thank you.
Honorary Member for St. Peter.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will try really, really hard not to be too long. I'm conscious of the time, but I think there are a number of matters. I'm not going to go over what the Honorable Attorney General and the Honorable Member for St. James Central have shared so far, but I want to highlight a few things. And the first one is, Mr. Speaker, even as I support the amendment to the Severance Payments Act, and I do that as Minister responsible for labor, I do it because I recognize, like the other partners in the social partnership recognize, that recovery from the pandemic situation that we find ourselves in will take a coordinated effort. It will take genuine partnership to get us from where we are to where we ought to be. And so, in the spirit of partnership, both business, management and owners, and workers and their representatives got together with government to discuss how we go about saving businesses and saving jobs. Now, for us as a government, we recognize that this was really a balancing act. This was a balancing act. There were certain things that the business sector were asking us to do, and there were certain positions being taken by workers and their representatives. The balancing act that we had to work through and to navigate included how far do we go to keep businesses afloat, because we recognize that keeping a business afloat is not just a benefit for the owner of the business, because we are not, this piece of legislation and the amendment that we are debating this evening in this honorable chamber is not for people who are their own bosses. This is not for one employee businesses. This piece of legislation refers and speaks to and is directed toward businesses that employ workers. Those workers who, by virtue of the situation that we find ourselves in, are laid off and will become eligible for unemployment benefits. So we are working through and have worked through how to keep businesses afloat, but not just for the sake of the business owner, but for the sake of those who are employed by the businesses. Like we've said before, our intention as a government, especially as a Labour Party, is to make sure that there is work, but not just any type of work, decent work for the people of this country. Work that is fulfilling, work that allows the worker to reach their full potential and recognize and understand and feel themselves to be valuable members of this society, contributing to the society, contributing to the development of themselves and their households, their families, and their dependents. We also, Mr. Speaker, had to balance keeping the right to severance kicks in the Substantive Act at 13 weeks. Now we are working through and had to work through how do we defer or do we defer that right that is enshrined in the Severance Payments Act, how do we balance a deferring of that right with providing long-term employment for the workers who have that right? And that is where the dialogue makes a whole lot of sense. Because in that dialogue, the workers said to us and the workers said to business, we are interested in long-term employment. Workers are saying, like the honorable member for St. James Central, we have obligations. And you know, I am so happy to be a part of this party. A party that came into office and as one of its first orders of business was to restore tertiary education free at the point, well, free for the student, paid for by the society. Because in our discussions, in our consultation, in the dialogue at the level of the partnership, we are able to see the good sense of the people of Barbados. Good sense that sometimes others seem to either take for granted or assume doesn't exist. But we as a government see it every time we consult with people. We saw it before election, as we rubbed shoulders. We saw it as we had our people's assemblies, and we saw it in our discussions on this matter. Individuals who, when others are saying they're going to jump for severance, individuals saying to us, we want long-term employment. We have obligations. We recognize that these lump sums sometimes look good, but they disappear just as fast as you get them. We, Mr. Speaker, have the privilege to lead in a Barbados that has a significantly large proportion of very sensible people. And I'm happy that 8,400 of them live in St. Peter. But there are many all over the country, including in St. James Central, and we will soon see the manifestation in St. Michael West and other places. We also had, Mr. Speaker, to balance what we heard from workers and their representatives with what businesses were asking for. And the dialogue and the consultation that we engaged in allowed us to reach the point where each side did not get what it wanted, but each side was satisfied with the outcome. And that is the essence of good leadership and good governance, where everybody wins, but for the long-term good of everybody and the long-term good of the country. The Ministry of Labor and the Minister of Labor supports the amendment because we recognize just what workers recognize, the need for long-term and sustainable employment. And we also recognize that in this whole operation, workers will continue to receive unemployment benefit for up to 26 weeks. So we know that some portion of the earnings of workers is guaranteed while on layoff up to a period of 26 weeks. There are, however, Mr. Speaker, some issues that are thrown up and have been thrown up in this process of consultation. The Honourable Member for St. James Central spoke to some of them. I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, and to the country, that recovery in this situation and the continued development of this country has to be people-centered. It has to be people-centered. And the reason why, Mr. Speaker, you will hardly hear me use the word labor is because I am of the view, and it is a personal view, but I'm of the view that too many people in this country And too many, I'm not saying the majority, but too many employers see the human beings who come into their places of business every day as providers of labor as opposed to human beings. And so there is an expectation that a person, once they walk through the door, will throw off. A man may have been beaten by his wife the morning or the night before, but he's expected when he walks in the door to forget all about that and to act and to work as though nothing has happened. The person may have a headache. There are all kinds of things that human beings experience. So that when a worker goes on vacation, a vacation is not for preventative maintenance. You do that for machines. So a worker can have 4 weeks vacation, go back to work on a Monday morning, and have a challenge. And it is not within the purview of anybody to say, well, you just had 4 weeks vacation. You should come back fresh. Human beings are not machines. And even machines, after you service a vehicle, sometimes you take it home and it breaks down. So I just want to say that those who lead businesses, and many of those who lead businesses, were once workers on the line. And I continue to be dismayed that persons who have come through the ranks sometimes act, as my late father used to say, act like gillygogs. I don't know what the word means, but it sounded like something real bad. And people act like that after coming through a system, acting as though they've forgotten how it was to be a worker. Any development, any recovery has to be people-centered. The Severance Payments Act was developed to create a certain level of certainty for workers. A certainty that said, you cannot lay me off and keep me laid off forever. There will come a time when I'll be able to trigger a process that will allow me to disengage from employment with you with some reward for the effort, the contribution that I've made to your organization. It was created to give that certainty to workers. It is a worker-centered piece of legislation. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, as we crafted the amendment to the Substantive Act, that we ensured in our discussions with both workers and owners of businesses and managers of businesses, that we reinforce in their minds that any amendment had to continue to carry the idea that this is a piece of legislation to protect workers and to give them a sense of certainty. Now, the consultation also threw up that in many organizations there is poor communication. Very, very poor communication between management and workers. One of the examples of poor communication that came to my mind quite forcibly was the view that communication with workers should be done by a trade union. Now, I was forced to say then, and I'm going to say now, that any organization that employs workers have a responsibility, any organization has a responsibility to communicate with those workers. The responsibility is not that of a trade union. If I employ people, I have a responsibility to them. And that responsibility is not to be given to anybody else. Just like we tell parents that the role of parenting is not the role of the teacher. It is the role of the parent. The role of communicating with the workers, those adults who work with you, is yours if you have employed them. They are employed with you. You are to communicate with them. That communication, Mr. Speaker, has to be a communication of the good, and it has to be a communication of the not so good. What we saw coming through in our consultation was that some employers seem to have a challenge communicating bad news while wanting a favorable response. And that says to me that there is not a culture of communication. Because if there's a culture of communication, then you can sit and dialogue with people and be able to explain your situation and ask for buy-in. We've seen it as a government. Today, for most of the day, we debated the BOSS program, the optional savings scheme. And the chamber has heard extensively about the level of consultation that has taken place, and the consultation that resulted in almost unanimous buy-in by those who were consulted with. Consultation works, and businesses represented by their owners and by managers have to learn to talk with people, to have conversations with their employees, with their workers. So not just treat them as human beings, but also communicate with them. Before I sit, and I'm going to skip a number of things I wanted to say, but there's one thing that I must say before I take my seat. There is, in the minds of quite a number of employers, that in emergency situations, their only responsibility is to write a letter to the chief labor officer saying that they're going to lay off some of their workers. Now, I want to be very clear, and I've said it to the private sector, and I want to say it to the country. In the Employment Rights Act, and just let me remind employers in this country that the pandemic, the public health emergency legislation does not abrogate, does not get rid of any of the pieces of legislation that are on the books in this country. I want to say that to all businesses, all business leaders, whether owners or managers in this country. The Employment Rights Act at Section 38, subsection 7C. The entire clause speaks to consultation and the steps that are supposed to be taken, the steps that are to be taken in laying off workers. 7C speaks to special circumstances where it is not possible to have the 6-week consultation and all the other things that are required. But this clause, Mr. Speaker, says that where in any case there are special circumstances which render it not reasonably practicable for the employer to comply with the to comply with any of the requirements of paragraphs A and B, the employer shall immediately consult with the chief labor officer and take all such steps toward compliance with that requirement as are reasonably practicable in all the circumstances. I'm saying to managers of businesses that consult means consult. Now, I shouldn't have to say that to intelligent people, but I realize from the discussions that we've had that I do have to say that to intelligent people. Consult means consult. Consultation is not writing a letter, putting it in the post, or getting your messenger to deliver it. But that is not consultation. That is informing. The legislation speaks to consultation. And it says you will do whatever is reasonably practicable. Now, the reason why I say that, well, another reason why I say that, besides the fact that it is enforced and must be complied with, but the other reason I raise it is because the action that says all I have to do is send a letter and tell you to go home tells me that there's a lack of respect in some quarters for the dignity of the human beings who work in some organizations. And I want to say this. I have worked in people management for quite a portion of my life. And some persons who, I say this not very easily. This is a little bit emotional, but it's something I feel very strongly about. There has been over time a desire for persons who call themselves or who are designated as human resources managers to find their place in an organization. The financial controller is seen as an important person in an organization. If there is a corporate secretary or a legal officer, an important person in an organization, a general manager and operations manager, human resources managers have tried over quite a while to get into what is seen as the top layer of management. And what I have realized, Mr. Speaker, is in my mind an unfortunate direction being taken where those officers who should be the officers that a worker can turn to when that worker feels down, feels offended, feels taken advantage of, there are too many human resources managers who try to be rougher than the general manager to prove to the general manager that they are part of the organization. I just want to say to human resources managers, there is no need to try to prove your value by being tough and rough with workers. Your role is not to be tough and rough. The general manager's role, the managing director's role, the CEO's role is not to be tough and rough. The role of the HR manager should be not just to the workers, but to bring a sense of humanity to the management structure of an organization. And I want to appeal to human resources managers, people development managers across this country to be in the vanguard of bringing humanity to any management structure that does not at this time recognize the full humanity of workers. Be in the vanguard, lead the charge, do what you know to be the right thing, the human thing, and treat workers in this country as the human beings that they are. This bill before this honorable chamber, Mr. Speaker, is one that balances keeping businesses afloat and viable with making sure that there is long-term employment for our people. And so I have no challenge whatsoever in fully supporting this piece of legislation, recognizing that our ultimate goal as a government and as a country is the recovery of the country from the pandemic, the restoration of the economy so that all the social structures that are built on good economic foundation can be restored and that people can again find the fulfillment that comes with full, decent work and employment in the organizations of this country. And with those words, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 9:15.
To the time? Honorable Member, until what time?
9:15, half an hour.
The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 9:15 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 9:15 p.m.